As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So 42 Israelis who attended the Nova Music Festival near the Gaza border that was attacked on October 7th have sued the Israeli security establishment for failing to protect the event. So this is an interesting story. This lawsuit filed a claim for $56 million against Israel's Shin Bet security agency, the Israeli Defense Forces, the Defense Ministry, the Israeli police, and the lawsuit says that the agency's negligence and the gross oversight allowed the Hamas attack on the festival to happen. So the lawsuit reads, quote, a single phone call by IDF officials to the commander responsible for the party to disperse it immediately in view of the expected danger would have saved the lives and prevented the physical and mental injuries of hundreds of partygoers, including the plaintiffs, end quote. So Haaretz has reported that top Israeli military officials held consultations the night before October 7th to discuss warnings they received about a possible Hamas attack. So Israeli officials had a heads up that something was happening, that some unusual activity was going on in Gaza. But the Israeli military, nobody in the Israeli military notified the Nova Festival organizers. And, they were very close to the Gaza border. So this all had to be, the festival had to be approved by the Israeli military, and it was supposed to be under IDF protection. So the lawsuit reads, quote, on the night between October 6th and October 7th, at least 2 IDF assessments were held due to unusual incidents on the Gaza Strip border, one near midnight and another assessment close to 3 a.m., several hours before the Hamas attack, end quote. So the festival's production team has said that they could have evacuated the entire party, even if they received a warning just 1 hour before the attack. And once the attackers descended upon the festival, the partygoers were told that they were on their own. So this is really, kind of going over this again, because I know we covered that Haaretz report on antiwar.com just about how they had a warning the night before and kind of how long it took for the Israeli military to respond to the attack on the music festival. That Haaretz report says that organizers contacted the Israeli military at 7 a.m., the morning of the attack, and Israeli forces did not get to the scene until 3 p.m., so 8 hours later. And once the Israeli military did show up, they started firing indiscriminately at Palestinian militants and Israeli civilians. An Israeli police investigation found that IDF helicopters that arrived at the scene fired on Hamas fighters and also hit some festival participants. Now, I don't know, the proportion, how many Israelis they hit, how many were killed, how many were just injured. I really have no sense of kind of the proportion, but it's definitely worth pointing out. And there's other evidence that the IDF killed and wounded some civilians, some Israelis on October 7th, and then in the couple days of fighting that followed in southern Israel. Articles from Axios, and it says that Israel's Supreme Court on Monday narrowly struck down a controversial law that's part of the Netanyahu government's judicial overhaul and limited the court's ability to review government decisions. So if you remember, before October 7th, for a long time, there was a political crisis going on inside Israel over this judicial overhaul that the Netanyahu government was pushing that would basically take power away from Israel's Supreme Court and let the Knesset overturn Israeli Supreme Court decisions. This one specific law that was passed limited the court's ability to review government decisions. It was the first step, the first law that they pushed forward. And there was actually a leak, I think, last week that this was going to be the court's decision. So now the question is, and this Axios report kind of goes through some potential scenarios. The question is, how is Netanyahu's government going to react? They put out a statement saying that they were not happy with the decision. So Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed on Monday to ramp up attacks on Ukraine in response to the Ukrainian strike on Russia's Belgorod Oblast. Putin said during a New Year's Day visit to a military hospital, quote, they want to intimidate us and create uncertainty within our country. We will intensify strikes. Not a single crime against our civilian population will go unpunished, end quote. So Ukraine targeted Belgorod in a missile attack on Saturday, and this was the most significant Ukrainian attack on Russian territory of the war, really the biggest one. And it came a day after Russia launched a big missile and drone barrage across Ukraine that was said to be Russia's largest missile salvo of the war as well. So the governor of Russia's Belgorod Oblast said Monday that the death toll in the Ukrainian attack had risen to 25 civilians. Putin insisted that Russia's strikes in retaliation will only be aimed at military facilities, although Ukrainian officials said that 31 civilians were killed in the Friday Russian missile barrage. Putin said, quote, "Of course we can hit public squares in Kiev and in any other Ukrainian city. I understand I'm boiling with rage, but do we need to hit civilians? No, we are hitting military targets, and that's what we will keep doing," end quote. So Russia launched a pretty big drone barrage across Ukraine on Monday morning. And as it's become clear that Ukrainian forces cannot beat Russian forces on the battlefield and the war fatigue is growing in the West, Ukraine has been stepping up sabotage and other types of attacks inside Russia. So when it comes to us in the U.S. and in the West, our concern is that these Ukrainian attacks inside Russia that Russia views as only being possible thanks to NATO support could really risk provoking a direct war between Russia and NATO.
How have the sanctions helped the Russian economy?
Александр, вы сказали, что есть такая шутка, что россияне благодарят Джо Байдену за санкции. А как санкции помогли российской экономике?
Раньше очень много товаров мы перестали производить, потому что их привозили из Америки, из Европы, и мы забыли, как это делать все сами. А сейчас, когда ввели санкции, у нас нехватка этих товаров, мы начинаем их сами производить. И в итоге мы становимся более суверенной, независимой страной, потому что меньше зависим от поставок из-за рубежа. Мы стали многое делать внутри страны, то, что раньше покупали у Америки, у Европы.
Well, we unlearned how to produce a lot of goods because we imported them from the US or Europe. And with sanctions, they are no longer available, so we have to relearn how to produce them. And it improves our sovereignty. It makes us more self-sustained.
Scott, what is the status of conscription in Russia, and what is the status of the Russian army? From my perspective here, being educated by you, Colonel McGregor, Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, and the others, it appears that the war is nearly over. Ukraine is on its last leg, but it also appears that Russian mothers and sisters and daughters and girlfriends want their sons and fathers and boyfriends and uncles to come home from the war.
Well, everybody wants their loved ones to come home from the war, but if you walk around Moscow, you walk around any city in Russia, you'll see posters for recruiting. 1,500 Russian men are volunteering every day to go to this war. There's no anti-war movement. I'm not going to say that there's a strong pro-war movement because the Russians are too mature for that. But there is a desire that Russia must defeat this enemy, this Ukrainian government that's embraced the ideology of Stepan Bandera, that carries out atrocities like the attack on Belgorod the other day, that this government must be destroyed, and that's the job of the Russian military, and the Russian people are behind them.
Alexander, are the Russian people fearful of an expansion of the war? As you know, President Biden has threatened, I don't think he's serious, but he has threatened the use of American ground troops. Are the Russian people concerned about this?
Скажите, Александр, а боятся ли в России расширения военных действий? Президент Байден упоминал, не знаю, насколько он серьезен был в этом утверждении, что рассматривает возможность отправки американских войск. Вот насколько боятся в России расширения военных действий?
Очень хороший вопрос, спасибо. Мы не хотим этого, но мы не боимся.
That's a very good question, thank you. We don't want that, but we're not afraid of that.
Мы понимаем, за что мы сражаемся, и я хотел бы обратиться и к американцам, что не надо видеть нас врагов.
We know what we're fighting for, and I want to address the US people now. Please don't view us as enemies.
Чтобы американским людям проще было нас понять, представьте, что вокруг Америки, в Мексике, в Канаде стояли бы наши военные базы и ракеты. Наверное, американцам бы это не понравилось.
To understand us, please imagine the world when there would be military bases and missiles in countries neighboring the US, such as Mexico or Canada. How would you feel? I don't think you would like it.
Мы, как никто, не хотим воевать, потому что, вы знаете, во время Великой Отечественной Второй мировой войны у нас погибло 27 миллионов человек.
We don't want to fight. We want to fight the least because during the World War II, during the Great Patriotic War, 27 million people died.
И для нас сейчас наша военная операция – это в том числе и память о наших дедах, которые погибли.
So for us, this special military operation is in part in memory of our grandfathers who died back then.
Поэтому мы никогда не проиграем эту войну.
That is why we're never going to lose that war.
Мы не хотим воевать, я еще раз повторюсь, но если до этого дойдет дело, то воевать мы умеем лучше всех.
We don't want to fight, I want to repeat that. But if it comes to fighting, we know we can fight better than everyone else.
What do the Russian people think of the West, of Western society, of the US, of the UK, and of Western Europe?
Александр, а что думают россияне о Западе, о западном обществе, о США, о Великобритании, о Западной Европе?
Мы четко отделяем народы этих стран от руководства этих стран.
We see a clear distinction between the peoples of those nations and their political leadership.
И Скотт свидетель, очень хорошее отношение к американцам. У нас нет никакого негатива к американцам. Я понимаю, что это может быть с учетом той пропаганды, которая в США звучит удивительно, но я надеюсь, господин Наполитано, что вы лично приедете, я вас приглашаю. Жаль, что в этот раз не получилось, вы сможете сами в этом убедиться.
And Scott was able to witness that. There are no negative feelings to the US people. Scott could experience that.
И я, пользуясь случаем, если можно, хотел бы поздравить американский народ, представляя русский народ, поздравить с Новым годом.
And I would like to use this opportunity to congratulate the people of the United States from the people of Russia with the holiday season, with the New Year.
Мы не враги, мы такие же люди, как и американцы. Мы так же, как и вы, хотим жить, работать, жениться, рожать детей, путешествовать, приезжать к вам в гости, чтобы вы приезжали к нам в гости.
We are people just like you. We are not your enemies. We want to live like you. We want to work like you. We want to get married like you. We want to travel and travel to visit each other.
Поэтому я хотел бы пожелать американцам здоровья, счастья.
So I would like to wish US people good health and happiness.
Благополучия и больше хороших новостей и позитивных событий.
Well-being, more positive news and more positive events.
I'm very happy to welcome back to the show the great Roger Waters, of course, lead singer and frontman of the legendary rock band Pink Floyd, as well as a great activist for peace.
I want to go home now. Papa, please take me home. Mama, please tell me I'm dreaming. And I'll wake up soon, and I won't be alone. Mama, it's dark here. Daddy, stop breathing. Mama.
It's Anti-War Radio. I'm talking with the great Roger Waters. That was his latest song he wrote last night. Do you have a name for it yet?
Yeah, it's called Under the Rubble.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that. And so let's talk about the current bombing campaign, ethnic cleansing campaign, genocide in the Gaza Strip. This is one of the features of this war, I guess, because people are crammed into such a small space. Nobody lives in a little house. Everything is a concrete 3 or 4 or 5 story high rise. And so everything Israel bombs, they're just collapsing tons of concrete rubble onto people. And it's kind of a recurring feature of this campaign is people's hands and feet stuck out, people buried alive, people trapped, still alive, obviously, their hands moving, their voices crying out, with tons of rubble on top of them, where there's zero chance that anyone is ever going to be able to get to them, who are just stuck and left to die in there. Buried alive.
Yeah, and most of them children. I mean, the highest percentage, children. Most of the people trapped in the dark, alone, dying, are children. And they're doing that. The Israeli government, is not the Jewish people, not Judaism, not the Jews. Don't start anybody even breathing that this has anything to do with Jews. The fact of the matter is that a lot of the Zionists who are committing this evil genocide are people of the Jewish faith. But we have to assume that they have been propagandized, just like Dionne Warwick. who didn't understand all those years ago why there was a cultural boycott of Israel, why we in the BDS movement were making, and in the anti-war movement, were making a fuss. We're making a fuss because Israel is slightly different. The anti-war movement, obviously, is because we object to the idea of killing people for profit, which is what war is about. When we look at history, when we do the reading, when we study the wars, certainly since the Second World War, they are all about making profit and stealing land from people. They're all about settler colonialism and about neoliberal economics. That's what it's for. It's nothing to do with a fight between good and evil. It's about making money. There's a fascinating article by Jeffrey Sachs yesterday morning. There have been many fascinating articles by Jeffrey Sachs. I'm sure Dion would look at me and go, Jeffrey who? You know, because she's never heard of Jeffrey Sachs. But Dion Warwick has probably never listened to a conversation about anything important in her life. And many of us don't. And that's why we're susceptible to the nonsense that's written in the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times and the mainstream media and MSNBC and Fox News and all of this mainstream media, because we are living in 1984. These are all the tools of Big Brother, and they're just outlets for propaganda of the ruling class who wishes to maintain this horror that we live through. But at least I'm living through it by a river in Hampshire in England through this Christmas. My brothers and sisters in Palestine are living with their children buried under rubble in the dark, which is what that tiny little song is about. Because I can't go to sleep. I'll come in here and what can I do next? And I follow Twitter a bit, and I look at social media and see what comfort I can find. And I do find some comfort from the fact that it's quite clear now that we are a huge majority globally now of the people who say, no, this is wrong, completely wrong.
You mentioned 1984, and it raises to me the idea of the doublethink, where you have to believe this and that at the same time, even though they completely contradict each other. And it seems like the big one right now is we're hunting Hamas. We're destroying Hamas. These guys are, and I agree with this, about one click to the left of al-Qaeda. They deliberately butcher civilians, including, in this case, an extended family member of mine was caught up and killed by them in this thing. And so the Israeli take is, well, we're hunting bad guys. At the same time, they are not either. They've killed far more than 20,000 people, maybe 25, and the vast majority of them, even according to the Israelis, by the way, people say, where do you get those numbers? The Israelis agree with the Gaza Health Ministry's numbers. They said to Reuters that we agree. And they said, hey, but look, at least 1/3 of the people we're killing are combatants. What? In other words, they concede that 2/3 of the people that they're killing are not combatants. And of course, we know that's much worse than that.
Yeah, they lie and lie. But they always have. They've never veered from the lie that they've been telling since the 1920s about Palestine, which is that it's land without people. They're still trying to tell that same lie. It was the lie that was popularized by Golda Meir back in the 50s or whenever it was. A people with no land, a land with no people for a people with no land. It's just a lie. It's an outright barefaced lie.
Want me to brag, but I want you to know, double vaxxed, booster, never got COVID. Clearly, Jesus loves me the most. Seriously. So nice. So nice.
I still find that one pretty disturbing. Of course, we were all subject to an enormous propaganda campaign that was completely immersive, plainly coordinated, so it's no wonder that many people felt that they were making a moral and ethical choice by taking those medications. Indeed, that's the way that it was presented, in spite of a complete lack of clinical evidence that those medications were effective in stopping transmission. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact.
Comedian Heather McDonald collapsed over the weekend during a show.
Management saying she suffered a skull fracture in the fall.
The CDC has confirmed
higher than normal cases
of heart inflammation in 16 to 24-year-olds.
Service members later developed myocarditis.
You take all of the vaccines since 2010 and you compare 2021, this thing blows through the roof. Experts say more and more younger women are suffering from stroke.
Sorry, Aaron, I'm not feeling very well right now.
80% of the cases have been in young boys.
One of the decisions that we were invited to make during this period was to sacrifice our own health and our own freedom in order to preserve the sanctity of life of other members of our community, in particular the vulnerable, which is a principle, of course, that anybody would support, which is why that principle was continually amplified. But now we are beginning to see that what played out is that young people were invited to make a sacrifice way beyond taking a medication vaccination to protect older people. It was a sacrifice that was going to literally impact them. Certainly the information around myocarditis and pericarditis suggests that, as well as new available information around sudden death syndrome and the excess deaths in the United States of America, as well as the over 1 million reported adverse events from taking the vaccines.
The 14-year-old's heart stopped.
A 15-year-old boy died
After receiving his first dose.
16-year-old was rushed to the hospital. Loved ones say the 17-year-old's heart stopped.
The elite runner was rushed to the hospital after suffering a heart
High school
attack.
football player has died.
I think we live in a culture now of technocracy. Technocracy is governance by experts. Of course, it has components of digital dictatorship. But the reason I want to focus on this experts component is, do you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, or when you first saw people collapsing on sports fields, thinking, this seems a bit weird, this is not usual? And then the media reported, there's always been a number of sudden deaths. You saw that. You saw them trying to shut that down. You saw them try to frame it as potentially results of long COVID. You saw the incredible efforts that legacy media outfits went to mitigate, control, dampen down naturally emergent concern. I'm starting to think that our own common sense, our intuition and understanding is not as valuable as the information that could be granted by a NASA scientist when it comes to building a rocket, or an expert in agriculture when it comes to the cycles and expertise required to grow crops. But when it comes to a general understanding of reality, I think we are able to use common sense and intuition, personal understanding, communication between one another to establish narratives that seem perfectly plausible. For example, the idea that introducing a vaccine during a pandemic that couldn't possibly have been trialed for long-term effects because they hadn't had a long time to trial it all seemed pretty obvious to us. Increasingly, I'm noticing how common sense is being dismissed precisely because elites, as the word suggests, don't like ordinary people, see themselves as separate from ordinary people. In fact, you can't make any arguments for censorship and controlling hate speech without saying, first of all, we have an understanding of what should be communicated that you will never understand. That is already a step towards technocracy, dictatorship, an assumption that you are not in the role of an autonomous adult. You are in the role of a subject, a kind of servile child whose food has to be inspected and chewed before given to you. That is a dynamic that I reject, and I think increasingly that we're right to reject that dynamic because so many things that we sort of collectively felt together have proven to be true over time. Hey, what if these measures are somehow beneficial to establishment interests and generate profits while enabling them to introduce regulation that controls the lives of ordinary people seemingly legitimately and for our own safety? What if that's what's behind this? Well, I suppose then you'd start seeing footage of people dropping dead on sports fields. Well, here is that footage.
Collapsing in the middle of the game.
Collapsing during the game.
Collapsing on the tennis court.
Suddenly collapsing.
The player collapsed
and died.
after collapsing.
He collapsed.
He collapsed.
It seems that there's a second player who's collapsed. This is unusual. Never seen anything like this. Yeah, what's going on?
Sharp rise in unexplained deaths during the pandemic.
The number of deaths with unknown causes has gone up over the last 3 years.
Deaths that are not listed as COVID related.
I'm sorry, I'm feeling really dizzy.
Healthy young people are dying suddenly from a mysterious syndrome.
Sudden adult
Death syndrome. SADS is an umbrella term to describe unexpected deaths in young people.
There is some evidence that some sort of delayed reaction to COVID.
Why would the legacy media not investigate this with the same vigour that they've applied to a variety of other subjects that appear to enhance their ability to control dissenting voices and shut down counter-narratives? Why is there a demand for censorship to be enshrined in law from the EU to Ireland to the United Kingdom to the United States of America to Canada? Why has it become so important to control information when the ability to create content like this has just become global and worldwide? It's precisely because information like this, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that all of those athletes died or that all of those athletes were suffering as a result of particular medications, but the data is available now. Excess deaths are rising, the life expectancy in the United States of America is falling, and it isn't because of COVID. Comparable figures are available in the United Kingdom, and once again, the same is true. Sudden deaths, unexpected deaths, excess deaths, all rising, and it isn't because of COVID. Curiously, there is a total lack of appetite to investigate this, even though it seems like there's ample evidence to warrant an investigation. Health agencies are not investigating it, legacy media organisations are not investigating it. Elsewhere, we've reported on the kind of relationships that exist between Big Pharma and cable news media, who receive the vast majority of their funding, not only from Big Pharma, but specifically from Pfizer, just one organisation. Have you ever seen Albert Bourla contend with a single difficult question, except for when he was chased by rebel news through the snowy streets of Davos? Of course you haven't. You've just seen him in puff piece after puff piece. Independent media is vital because it allows these questions to be asked. Were it not for the valuable voices in this space, you wouldn't have a COVID inquiry in the UK, you wouldn't have any dissent at all, you wouldn't have no uptake for the latest COVID booster shots, because none of this information would be available. I'm not saying that just because I am an independent media figure, even though I personally know the level of attacks that are likely if you put yourself in a position of dissent. I know it personally. I'm just one voice in an increasingly powerful space, but the real power is with you, your independent thought, your ability to choose. That's what they are trying to shut down and control. They do not want an awakened dissenting population investigating the high levels of corruption in their own state, in their own media, and in particular in globalist, corporatist agencies and financial entities, because if people become aware to that, we will oppose it. Don't tread on us.
The book is Diary of a Psychosis. According to the NIH website, psychosis refers to a collection of symptoms that affect the mind, where there has been some loss of contact with reality. During an episode of psychosis, a person's thoughts and perceptions are disrupted, and they may have difficulty recognizing what is real and what is not. Now, a lot of COVIDians, as they're often called, will say, you are experiencing psychosis because you just won't listen to the experts. You say they're experiencing psychosis. How do we falsify this? How do we know who is experiencing psychosis?
That's a good question. Well, I'm not the one going around ordering people to radically change their lives and upend them. So that's the first thing. I think the presumption is in my favor because I'm not demanding anything of anybody. And I'm not socially ostracizing people for noncompliance, or I'm not imposing on them personal and professional destruction because they refuse to take an injection that they feel they neither want nor need. So I think right off the bat we have that. But again, I can look at the results. People say, well, you're not a medical doctor. Okay, I can read a chart. The thing is, I can read a chart. I'm not going to tell you what medicine you should take, but I can read a chart. And like any educated person, I can read a chart. I'm very happy that I have a very good medical person, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, writing the foreword to my book, Dr. Bhattacharya from Stanford. So I have plenty of medical allies. But the point is, I just need to look at the charts. So how about the states that were most frequently discussed, I think, during all this, because they represented the extremes. We had California on the one hand, heavily locked down to the point of absurdity. Absolute absurdity. The rules made no sense at all. Like the drive-in movies were allowed to go on because you are, after all, in your car. But the health department said no double features. Like what does that have to do with anything? So there's California. And then, oh, by the way, when they reopened Disney at 10% capacity, which 10-15% capacity, it was the last Disney property anywhere on earth to be reopened. They opened it on the condition that you can't scream on the rides. because screaming on the rides is a voluntary action, you understand? So you had that. Then you had Florida, which even before DeSantis officially opened it in September 2020, it was pretty open. I mean, I was more or less doing what I wanted to do. The restaurant thing was annoying at the beginning, and haircuts and stuff like that. But yeah, it was pretty open. So what's the difference? Well, when you look at all-cause mortality, which is what really matters, because trying to compare COVID deaths, you run into the problem of what should be coded as a COVID death. There's no international agreement on that even now. So that's a problem. And then secondly, there are obviously premature deaths caused by the mitigation itself, and you have to capture that too. So all-cause mortality is the metric to use. And Florida did better than California. I mean, that's all you need to know. That's the one statistic you need to know. Florida did better than California. Age adjusted, they did better. So if you're going to continue to tell me to do things like this and put on a mask and all these other useless things, when I have all the evidence I need, and we've had this evidence for a long time, and you can clearly see these things don't do anything, that's the sign that we've removed ourselves from the realm of reason. I keep saying that the reason that the Biden people were so panicked that masks were coming off on airplanes was not that they actually thought, oh no, a whole lot of people are going to get sick. Yeah, they're deeply concerned for our well-being, Keith. No, the real reason was they were concerned nothing would happen. We take the masks off and nothing would happen, which is exactly what happened. We took the masks off, nothing happened, and we went on. And I think they didn't want that because they might have feared if we take the masks off and nothing happens, then maybe the people will wonder, well, I wonder maybe if nothing would have happened if we had also not done X or not done Y.
Came across a summary of a book titled Elephant in the Brain. This is by Robin Hanson, who worked at George Mason University. It says, on the face of it, the reason that people participate in politics is to improve the world in some way. However, most of us engage in politics in a way which is emotional, poorly informed relative to the strength of the claims we make, and we are generally unwilling to compromise on political issues. These facts are better explained if politics is a way of signaling affiliation to a tribe of like-minded people than as a way of actually trying to improve the world. If we can say that that's more or less true, what can we learn from that as far as lessons to extract for promoting freedom in the future?
Well, I think this is the tough one, is that we learned something about mankind through all this. And I came out of this very chastened and demoralized because to some degree, what you and I are doing, Keith, relies on the assumption that if people are given a reasonable argument, they will give it their assent. And if they're given an unreasonable argument, they will object to it. And they'll find the flaws. I'm finding a flaw in that. I don't think I'm not so sure that's true. So I don't know what that means for us. But what I think it has to mean is that we can't just write refutations of what these people are saying and just think, well, people's natural affinity for reason is going to make them agree with me. I think we need to do more visceral things like more flat out ridicule of these people. I mean, we're laughing at these people. Make videos where you show how ridiculous everything they're asking for is, and you laugh at them so that you make people embarrassed to be part of it. I mean, it has to be. I'd like you to be embarrassed because it makes no sense logically. But if you're embarrassed because you're afraid you're going to look like the fool in the video, that's good enough for me. So I think our side tends to be the side that wants to write the philosophical treatise, and we need philosophical treatises. But we also need to get good at just flat out reaching people on a gut level, which is one thing the other side is very, very good at, is reaching people because that's all they have. They don't have the logic. They have the gut. They have the gut. They have stories. They have appeals to emotion. So unfortunately, it means we may have to engage in more of that than we're doing now.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
You have this anti-system movement. What we are seeing is a revolution against the system. So fixing the present system is not enough. Now there is, of course, a anti-system, which is called libertarianism, which means to tear down everything which creates some kind of influence of government into private lives. It's dismantling the system.
Ooh, that's right, Klaus. You're goddamn right. That's exactly what libertarianism is. When he's talking about this is like the arch nemesis, right? This is the guy that wants to have state power to address every single aspect, every issue in society and civilization in the world, all over. Big government. He wants to have them work in tandem with big business to control everything. And who does he say explicitly is the antidote? His arch nemesis. Not Republicans, not conservatives, not Christian nationalists, libertarianism. Klaus Schwab said so. Not me. Klaus. Satan himself. I had a tweet today from some conservative lunatic that said, libertarianism provides zero defense against cultural rot and ill-intentioned groups of the population sowing social degradation for their own benefit. So yeah, let's break this down. Libertarianism provides zero defense against cultural rot. Now, who has been in control for the past 100 years since the beginning of the progressive era in the early 1900s in America? Well, it hasn't been the libertarians, has it? It has been handed off between the Republicans, the alleged conservatives, and the Democrats, back and forth, libertarians never having any say. And where have we gotten? We've gotten to this point where now libertarians are blamed for everything, right? But what do conservatives do by and large? 90+% of them send their kids to public schools. Every single year. Well, they go onto Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and they just lament how atrocious the public school system is and how these Marxist teachers are indoctrinating their children. But it gets worse. They don't stop there. They then proceed to send their kids to 4 years of university where if they didn't get indoctrinated from the Marxist professors in elementary school or middle school or high school, well, you're damn right. We're going to give them another 4-year shot at it. Maybe 6. Maybe they'll get their master's. Or God forbid they get the PhD, in which case they are sure to come out the other end as a raging leftist lunatic. And then you turn around as your kid comes home on the holidays and he says, Dad, you're racist. Capitalism is the problem. The founding of this nation is immoral. It should all be torn down. And your reaction to that is, these damn libertarians, they got to my kid again. There is a pathway forward. The pathway forward is not to try and harness the power of the biggest state in human history, which is what the American government is, but rather to diminish it, and in that void, fill it with the culture that you expect to see in the world. You will not wield the power of the state into some sort of Christian renaissance. It ain't gonna happen. You hear me? Not going to happen. If you don't believe me, just look at the military of this country. What would have been considered a bastion of conservative politics for the longest time. And you have the highest level United States generals all the way up that will espouse the most absurd variants of progressivism, where they will talk about how the recruitment crisis is predicated off of lies that are prohibitive towards LGBTQ plus AILMNOP families. Think about how absurd that is. And at the highest level of the military, this is what they're pushing. You think because you're going to get, I don't know, Donald Trump in there, that it's going to completely reverse things? I have bad news for you. Donald Trump was the president of the United States just 3 years ago, and he did it for 4 entire years. And that didn't change one iota. I could argue that it's actually gotten significantly worse, exponentially, perhaps. So you're not going to reform this system into your preference of state-sanctioned Christian values. So the only answer, I know this makes you feel terrible, but the only answer is to embrace the libertarian outlook of diminishing state power and then practicing what you preach when it comes to personal responsibility. And instead of expecting the state to rear your child properly or expecting the state to get out of your way, rather Diminish the state so that they can't be in your way, in which case you can actually address what ails your children and yourself and your community and your culture and your church and your family and your nation. That is the pathway forward. I want to rant even harder about how you had an opportunity to have Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012, and instead you went with motherfucking John McCain and Mitt Romney, which makes me feel as if perhaps you won't ever hear what I have to say.
And although we've been doing this for a few years, I can't, it's hard to measure where the successes are. But people do encourage us. They say keep doing it, because it is true. You have to plant a lot of seeds before you have a forest. And just think of how the opposition has planted so many trees for the last 100 years or so to destroy, the republic that we have. And so we're going to do a little thing here to talk about. A lot of people are saying what they know is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we thought what we are sort of unhappy about it won't happen this year. And it was easy to find a little list on this. So we'll talk a little bit about what not to expect. But on some of these things, let's hope we're wrong, because we want them to happen. For instance, auditing the Fed. We want to. They're not going to do it. But if they did, we'd be very, very happy about it.
But the one thing that I have just a couple that I think won't happen. There's a lot. But one of the short list is that we won't, unfortunately, right size and right purpose the U.S. military. We know we talked about it on the show. We've passed a massive spending bill. There's all kinds of money in it for things that are completely unrelated to the defense of this nation. And it continues to grow. And this is an example. And I think hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this week. Colonel McGregor sent me this article over this morning. And it is an important article, and I haven't completely digested it. But it's just a symbol of what is not going to happen. Now, put this up if you can, this first one. This is from the New York Times. New spin on a revolving door. Pentagon officials turned venture capitalists. And you see here's Espy, who was the SecDef under Trump. And I just have one clip from it, and this tells you what I'm talking about on this one, Dr. Paul. If you can go to that next clip. He says, retiring generals and departing top Pentagon officials once migrated regularly to the big established weapons makers like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. Now, they are increasingly flocking to venture capital firms that have collectively pumped billions of dollars into Silicon Valley-style startups, offering the Pentagon new warfighting tools like autonomous killer drones, hypersonic jets, and space surveillance equipment. So to me, what this looks like, Dr. Paul, is that they are becoming a moving target and hard to, put your finger on. They're burying themselves in these little startups everywhere, and they're going to start sucking more money in. So when we keep talking about Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and how evil they are, they're going to be beside the point, because it's going to be hard to point your finger at these hundreds or maybe even thousands of startups. So it is like a cancer that's metastasizing and spreading throughout the body. So I think with that, it's probably not a good sign.
Right. The one thing that our viewers might choose to criticize us on is that you're not making a point. Won't it be a big difference on who wins? And I hope I'm right on what I'm thinking now. I hope there is a victory that is much more attuned to shrinking government, and that would be good. But the other side of this point is, when you look at the big issue, the issue you just talked about, the military-industrial complex, and what we're doing overseas, spending money and all this, the Republicans they don't have a good record.
No.
They haven't done that well. And but this year there's hope. I've been more emphatic in the past about it doesn't make any difference at all. So I'm hoping this year I can say, well, maybe there could be a difference. But the truth is some of these things, like, is the budget really going to shrink in size? It's not going to happen. And are we really going to bring our troops home? It's not going to happen. One thing that's going on now that is going to continue, unfortunately, because they're very creative in doing what I'm going to complain about, and that invade our privacy. Control of speech, and that was something that was very well known at the founding of this country, and it was a model. And yet it has now, deteriorated and spying on us. And the technology is such that they can spy more easily. And it's just like almost anything. There's so much mechanical things and weaponries and engines that can be used, and nuclear energy. It can be used for peace or it can be used for war. And that's what this technology is, because, I never claim I'm a technology person when it comes to internet. But boy, I love it, the ability to get something. But my main job is to sort it out and make sure I know where my sources are coming by. But and it was one thing that I mentioned as I was leaving Congress for the last time, was to make the point that the most important thing we protect Act. There's a lot of people who say, well, no, it's the Second Amendment. That's pretty important too. They're all important. Liberty is important. But I made the point about the First Amendment and expressing ourselves, that if we can't do that and we're going to be put in jail, and if you can't even run for office and one clerk can say, oh, we don't like what you're doing, we're going to exclude you, you're not being allowed here, sounds like a third world nation. So that's what we'll become if we don't change things. So I have a lot of confidence in people, finding information and changing their views, and to me that would be the very important thing to do. But right now there is a systematic attack on our personal privacy and our ability to express ourselves, and we've heard so much about that on the internet. It comes and goes, but it's still pretty bad. And I think that even the things that we do use, and we can't get away from using a telephone, that everything is recorded. So only the people waking up and saying enough is enough when we want to make sure this stops. Because protecting liberty to me is essential, because that is what people need in order to make their own personal decision. If you want to carry through a system of voluntarism, you have to have correspondence, talking to people and getting along with people, and not people with regulations and taxation and all these controls and recordings of everything you do. So I don't think it should be difficult to understand what personal liberty is all about. Mind your own business, and the government should certainly get out of minding our business, and I think the world would be a lot better place.